Welcome back to the Authenticity Calling podcast. I am your host, Ralitza and I am so grateful to be joined today by my wonderful friend, Lisa DeAngelis. Did I say your name correctly, Lisa?
Yeah, DeAngelis. I mean, it's all rolls off the tongue, right? Those Italian names.
That's right. Do you have an Italian accent that you could pronounce it in? That's quite different.
I wouldn't say it's quite different. It's sort of affected, DeAngelis. It
Ah,
comes off a little bit more bouncy on
I
the tongue.
love it.
If we were going to go that direction. I don't speak Italian fluently, but I was a classically trained singer, so there's a little bit of Italian that runs through my brain every once in a while.
Oh, beautiful. I love that. And you know what? It is so poetic when you say it with the right umph, and it just has it lands different. So absolutely. And do you
It's
have a
great.
longer name?
It's great. No, I don't actually, but it is funny when I travel because most people in European countries will pronounce it Lisa
That's
instead
right.
of Lisa, and they lean into that a little bit more. So it is fun when you travel, when you move through the world, how different people interpret who you are and those different facets of life that show up in different
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
It's
And that's so interesting that you say that because do you feel like you almost embody a different version
Mm.
of yourself when you get called by the same name in a different way?
That's such a great question. I have a fairly, European but pretty broad background in terms of my heritages. I have Italian in my family lines. I have Yugoslav, Serbian, and Croatian, and I have Austrian and a little bit of Irish. So there's like a little bit of everything that pops in and through. So it is very interesting because I feel like all of those different facets have different pieces of my personality.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will see my curly hair and sort of say, "Oh, that must be this coming out. That must be this," right? And our family were Northern Italians, so not the dark hair, dark skin. I have, slightly lighter skin. For some people will say, well, "You don't look that Italian," but it's always very funny to see what happens when you blend all sorts of things together, mix them up, and what sort of colors arise, right? When
That's
we
right.
blend everything together.
That's right. I love that. Absolutely. And I love that we just dove right into your background and where you're from and all the different places and spaces. And it's true. It's absolutely beautiful. Like 2, 3 generations from now, I think there's gonna be a lot of that mixing. So that's gonna be kind of perfectly normal to have all these different backgrounds and I think especially in the Western world. So yeah, that's really really interesting and really cool. Do you want to let our audience know what is it that brought you, I guess that brought you here on the podcast, but what is it that brought you into your own authenticity calling journey, and what is your special gift or yeah, just that you want to share with the audience?
Thank you. Well, authenticity is a word that I have really felt a kindred spirit with for quite some time. And I don't want to say before it was popular, but now authenticity is a real buzzword, But this was something I had been really seeking out for many years in my own inner journey. And it's interesting because my initial draw toward authenticity was really drilling down and figuring out who exactly I was, how to
Mm,
define myself in all of the very, very specific ways and say, I am this, I am this, I am this. And I'm authentic when I show up as all of these specific things that I can put on a list.
yeah.
And if you haven't picked up from that description, I am a bit of a type A personality. I am a planner. So lists and organization have always really driven a lot of how I've moved through the world. And then as people around me have started, both challenging this concept of authenticity and then gripping onto it and saying, well, authentic is letting me do whatever I want to do, right? On
Mm,
one side
mhm.
of that spectrum, or being authentic is sort of not clinging to anything. I started saying to myself, well, what does it really mean to be authentic? Because I
Yeah.
feel like I someone who can show up authentically in a lot of spaces. And what I've really come to respect about the whole situation and the whole concept of authenticity is that it really is this beautiful fluidity of embracing who we are in any given moment. And the fullness of how we can show up is our authenticity. It isn't a static word, it's
Yeah.
actually a state of who we are. Our authenticity is always shifting, always moving, and it is related to our environment. It's related to who we have been recently and who we want to become. So rather than drilling down to these very specific things about this is how I define who I am, authenticity has really become the freedom to show up in all my fullness.
Oh,
And that's really shown up for me in a lot of different ways. Most recently, I published a book on navigating personal change, and that whole process, writing a book, publishing a book, really taking the opportunity to think through what I believe and what I want to share with people,
yeah.
really both challenge and strengthened my concept of authenticity and who I am in the world, or who I want to be at this moment. We'll say
Yeah.
it that way.
Wow, what a beautiful definition and explanation of authenticity. And I think you actually really nailed that from the way that I also understand authenticity is that it is a journey. And I think that's why the podcast has been it's been such an evolution for me. I think on my own authenticity calling journey, the podcast itself, it has a life of its own and it calls all the right people to the hot seat at the right time to really further explore what does that look like? What does authenticity on me look like? And then mirrored from, everyone that I interview on the podcast. And I think it's just so brilliant that it is that full permission to just trust what comes through. It's almost like I think we would not be able to ground authenticity if it was just us functioning from the ego, from that sort of our limited self, but really that deeply connected to our truth and our purpose and our calling. I think to me, without that, I don't know how we would be authentic. And I think again, it is a journey because we are all somewhat limited by our ego, and it's such a gift. And so when I hear kind of your story and you're coming into what authenticity also means for you, it does evolve. It's a journey. And so yeah, and then the other thing that landed for me, which I think was really interesting, is that you've tried to put your authenticity on a page, but then you just listed out like how many different, cultures and backgrounds and places that you come from and genes that are intermingled to make this beautiful human that you are. And so it's so interesting that you tried to put it in a box and it just didn't fit.
It doesn't fit. It
It
doesn't
doesn't
fit. There's no
fit.
box that shape. Well, and another image that I really love when thinking about this concept is the idea of like the facets of a gem,
Mm.
right? It's sort of like each time you turn and the light reflects, you get a little bit of a different sort of prismatic pattern that comes alive.
Yeah,
And, we've heard all of these things about, you're a combination of 5 people you spend the most time with. What you think is what you do. All of these little
sure.
aphorisms that follow us. But I think that really is a reflection of this idea of we sort of choose what facets we're leading with at any given moment. But it doesn't
Mhm.
mean the other ones go away.
That's
It just
right.
means we've sort of decided to shift in and hone focus on one, and we can switch to another or polish or whatever, and that analogy could continue on. And I
Yeah.
think that's really beautiful about authenticity too. Just because I
Yeah.
decide to lead with something or really lean into one piece of who I am,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean the other stuff goes away. It doesn't mean
That's
it's
right.
at the expense of. It's not like one in, one out when it comes to personality or the way we show up, right? It's just a matter of what we're choosing to let shine brightest in these moments, or what combination of things. And I think that's really special.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that. I love that description. And you know what really comes up for me when you share that perspective is how important it is to be in the right sort of circle and supportive community and space to be able to kind of test out and get curious. What actually do I like and what don't I like? Because I think even as children growing up and as young adults, there's not a lot of permission for flexibility. If we're gonna be the good girl or the nice boy that I think from our generation, it's probably the strongest box that we've been trying to fit into. And we're coming into this new understanding that we don't actually fit in a box. There is no such thing as normal. Everyone has some kind of, divergence or uniqueness, and how beautiful that is. And we're really starting to honor that we don't all do things the same way, and that there aren't just four learning styles, and that there's so much, variability to the way that we show up. And I just love that. I think through that vulnerability of being open to playing and being curious and testing things out and seeing how they land, both for ourselves, but I think for the community around us. Like when we are safe to play, that's when we really get to establish who we truly are. And so I think it's just this calling to create community for me has been so strong, and connecting with people like yourself and just really seeing how those facets come out and what comes through me when I'm in that sort of a community, and just like that calling to create that for others has been so strong. And so I'm curious, like if there was any tip or trick or learning from your own authenticity calling journey, or from your own journey to finding more of that expression of who you truly are, what would be the first step or the first maybe 5 steps if someone's listening and they're really hearing like, yeah, I really want to have a deeper connection to myself. I really want to be able to fully express, or even like you said about your book, and I'd love to ask you more about that later, but what got you to going from this is an idea or a vision or something that I know I'm supposed to do someday in the future, to let me do this right this second, and like fully confident in that authenticity that this is yours?
That's a great question. Um, this is so fascinating. Horses. And I have had the immense privilege of working with equine partners with a number of different really, really talented mentors who are in this space of allowing us to learn from these beautiful creatures, majestic creatures who are so grounded in who they are and have so much wisdom to share. And it's fascinating because I remember so distinctly the first time I walked into a pen to work with these horses, and these are horses trained to facilitate this kind of learning and leadership growth experience. This isn't just sort of every horse, but I remember thinking, I have no idea how to interact with a horse. I had never been that close to a horse before, actually. And the facilitator I was working with, a wonderful woman named Kelly Wendorf, just said to me, they'll speak to you, just listen to what they have to say. And it was like my whole system glitched. I'm going, how am I going to understand what a horse is trying to tell me? And she said,
Yeah.
they might ask you to do something, they might teach you something, they might model something. And I'm just sitting there thinking, wow, I think I chose wrong here. I have no idea what is happening now.
Yeah.
But I ended up walking up to the horse I was most drawn to. And it was this beautiful leopard Appaloosa, came from a lineage of war horses, actually. The
Wow.
horse's name was Cimarron. He was beautiful. And I just walked up and I sort of went, hello. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, but hello. And he sort of, half ignored me for a moment. Then all of a sudden it was like, met my eyes, face on, square on. And he just took a breath. He closed his eyes and he took a breath. And it actually took my breath away because I had a moment of going, oh my God, I think that's what he wants me to do too. I don't know how I knew. I don't know how I experienced that. I
Wow.
just knew. And so I stopped. I took a deep breath and I let it out. And of course, the tears started coming. He was breathing with me. We did this little back and forth dance of breathing together for a few minutes. And later, when I was working with Kelly and she was helping me process this experience, she said, the thing that breeds trust in these animals is congruence. You showing up like you say you're going to.
Yeah.
And if you're scared and you walk up and you pretend you're not scared and the horse is going to want to have nothing to do with you. They don't trust you because what you're emitting and what you're showing with your physical self and your actual energetic self are fighting. And it
Wow.
was a huge lesson in that moment of saying, light bulb, authenticity is not being something I think I should be.
That's
It's
right.
being true to what is happening for me in any given moment. That is authenticity.
Ooh.
I know
Wow.
I have chills when I just said that again because I'm just taken back to this experience with these horses who model so beautifully that they don't care. They don't care if you're angry. They don't care if you're upset. They don't care if you're emotional and
Yeah.
can't let something go. They do not care if you're fearful, but they do care if you're not truthful
Yeah.
to who you are in that moment. And
Wow.
that was a huge lesson for me. So I think for me, if I had to give one like takeaway step, it's to really tune into this idea of what does it mean to honor where you are in any given moment? That level of congruence, right?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That is so many things. Like that takes me. First of all, I'm like, that's a great place for a first date. As a single woman in my 30s, I'm like, oh, well, if I'm not the best bullshit detector, at least the horse can sense it. That is the first thing that came to mind. I think that's hilarious. But you know what? A lot of that speaks true to exactly it's the experience of whether it's dating or whether it's resonating with friends or family members or whatever that is. I think we all have that deep knowing, that deep connectedness to energy. And I think I think a lot of times we bypass what our body's trying to tell us, and we stay very much in the mind. We try to analyze, the five senses that we've been told we have, and we forget about all the other senses that we have. And so I think that's really beautiful to kind of hear. And what really supports me and guides me in getting really clear when I'm not sure about what I see and hear, and those five senses we're taught about, is to close my eyes and to cut them off, and then everything else becomes so much more heightened. And so I just think about a horse and how you just described that experience. I haven't had a lot of I haven't had a lot of my own personal experience with horses, and it's also interesting you say that they're actually trained to do this, which I think is fascinating. But yeah, I get to wonder, like, what can we learn from them? How can we more embody that sense of, um, like you said, alignment, like what's on the outside and what's on the inside, that congruence. What do you feel has supported you in being able to come into that alignment? Because I call it alignment when it's either ego or essence, or our masculine and feminine energies being in alignment, and there's so many different ways that we can come to alignment. But in terms of authenticity, I think that's really important. What you just said is what we're actually expressing on the outside and what's going on inside. And we're very complex humans. There's a lot going on the inside, especially if we haven't teased it out and done the personal development. But where would you start for someone that's listening and is hearing this, and they're recognizing their world is like, I'm actually not my authentic self at work, and maybe not even at home, and maybe not even in my parenting, and maybe not even, in my friendships. Like, where
Hmm.
would you suggest starting? Like, how does that?
Well, again, I can pull from the horses and my experience there, but broadly as well. I think looking at any of our environments and saying establishing safety is so important. And we bypass what that means because we move through a world fairly, I don't want to, I don't want to minimize because some people do not have the experience of moving through the world with safety at all
Yeah.
times, right? But in general, we do not generally have to worry about walking outside of our house or getting into a car or walking into a grocery store. And we live in a fortunate environment where that is the case.
Mm,
But it does take the establishment of safety in an environment for us to be willing to let our guard down, be vulnerable,
mm,
actually release some of that almost hypervigilance that we might walk around with to say, what am I actually feeling when I can let go of that layer of me that's just so concerned with safety that I
yeah.
can't even get past it? So
Yeah.
safety, I think, is a really important thing. and having a lot of compassion for our patterns and habits, which are not all bad and have been developed for really, really good reasons. Because if we didn't have them, it would be totally a huge task to do anything, right? We develop, habits because we learn to do them things efficiently, and then we can do more. It's a great biological wiring we have.
Yeah.
But it can backfire sometimes when we do things on autopilot without ever thinking. So it's this kind of intersection of looking at what we might need to develop some safety, and then looking at how we can increase our awareness of what's happening in any given moment so we have more choice. It's not so we judge ourselves. And I think
Yeah.
that's really important
Yeah.
because it's really easy to sit around and say, well, that wasn't very good. Well, you could have done that better.
That's right.
But really genuinely bringing this in to say, interesting. I just found myself completely unwilling to share with that person when they asked me how I'm doing. I'm not okay, but
Yeah.
I just responded, oh, everything's fine. Thanks.
Yes. Yeah.
What is that? What is that space? If I just have a little bit of awareness and curiosity that can sneak in to say, why don't I feel comfortable? And it might be a safety thing. It might
Yeah.
be that you are worried about how this person might, I don't know, perceive you. It could be an authority figure at work where you're concerned about being too vulnerable. And
Mm-hmm.
these things are very real concerns and
Mm-hmm.
challenges. But if you're with someone that you do trust, a friend,
Yeah.
and you're still finding yourself having some of these habits and patterns of protective mechanism stick in, maybe it is a moment to say, do I actually need that in this moment? Or
Yeah.
can I rest a little bit into the safety of this space? It's one
Yeah.
of the beautiful things about developing a container of women, right? Which you
Mm-hmm.
do a beautiful job of doing, is
Mm-hmm.
that does create this environment of safety where all of a sudden it does remove a little bit of that barrier and it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a little bit easier to lean in to some of
Mm-hmm.
these spaces because it's hard
Mm-hmm.
to be vulnerable. It's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Something that you said, like that, my mind is very divided right now because there's a part of me because, and I've lived in places where you really have to be checking over your shoulder at all times, and
Hmm.
and I've also been in communities and environments where like you can leave your door open and no one's going to disrespect your boundaries in terms of this is your, your space, your home, your car, your whatever that is, and it's funny because I almost there's a light bulb that went up in my mind when you said safety. And it took me back to an experience of being in an environment that actually I had to be hyper vigilant. And I think the baseline for living is hypervigilance, but I think because people are so accustomed to it, and maybe it's because of that that they have no tolerance for anything but their full authenticity. But I feel like there, in that kind of environment, people were the realest, like the most authentic versions of themselves. And so this paradigm in my mind, just like I'm a little perplexed because I agree with you that that safety is so important. And that's why I think in coaching and in the space, to provide that safety and that space for reflection and that mirroring and that vulnerability. Is really important. And then the other part of me thinks that we're so comfortable that we're uncomfortable. It's really strange.
Mm,
And it's like there's so
mm,
much truth to not having a capacity to put up like all those filters because there's just no time for it because you don't like you just have to be hyper vigilant and aware all the time, and you just don't have the capacity for anything but your true self in that kind of environment. So not to look for feedback or anything, it's just what came through for me, which I find I find fascinating and really interesting. And I have to go back and kind of to the drawing board and question a little bit about that authenticity. And like you said, though, I don't think it's static. I think it varies and it changes all the time. And there's so many things feeding into, how we present in the world, what our value systems are, what did we see growing up? Are we accustomed to having that safety? And we need a little bit to be shaken up to question what's true for us and what's not. And again, that's why it's a journey. But yeah, just that's kind of what came through for me. I thought it was really interesting. And then the other thing that came through was that I think, and this came up in recent conversations with some friends of mine, also couples, but I think there's a space where we have such a judgment of, especially men. I think everyone, humans in general, but I think especially men, to not be able to express their emotions. And so there's a level of inauthenticity which is like socialized. It's almost like it's accepted and expected
Mm,
for men
mm.
not to be vulnerable. I think we're breaking through that a little bit in our society, but I do still think it's there a little bit, a lot, maybe a lot of it. And yeah, I get curious how that
Do
lands for you,
you do you mind if
obviously.
I pivot a little bit? I
Yeah,
mean, this,
totally.
this conversation is, a little on the esoteric, energetic side, but something really came up for me in some research that I was doing on my
Totally.
book, fascinating research on how emotions are made. And there's a woman named Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, who developed is what she calls the theory of constructed emotion. And I think for a long time, people thought that emotions were reactions.
Mhm.
And her research shows that emotions are actually predictive responses
Okay.
to two different factors. And
Mhm.
so one is a body budget, right? Our system knows how to look at our body budget, what's out of balance. If our cortisol level is high, if our this is, looking at the actual chemical body budget of what's happening in our physiological body system. And then it goes back to past experience. And it makes a prediction based on what can rebalance the body budget and what is closest to what it's experienced before.
Okay.
It creates an emotion, our system creates an emotion to sort of rebalance us and allow us to release what we can to get us back into a symbiotic state, which I find really fascinating. But if we're using past prediction, sometimes our system is wrong
Yeah.
because it goes, oh, this is a scary situation. So we need to create fear or hypervigilance or this to respond to it. And it's actually our system's job to say, oh, no, that's not the right situation for this. And then our body goes, oh, that wasn't correct. Let's go back. Let's rejig the prediction, right? And then when we actually land on something, our body stores that as new data. So if
Mm.
something happens in the future, it can recall a better prediction. It's the kind of reason where we may, she uses this example, where if you're walking, let's say in a busy place in a grocery store in a mall, and you think you recognize someone because they're about the same height, they have the same color hair, they wear something really similar, the body system kind of goes like, oh, that's so-and-so, I know them. And then you walk up and the person turns around and you go, oh, that is not
Yeah.
so-and-so. But your body made that prediction based on the experiences that it had.
Mhm.
And she uses the example of veterans that come back from war have trouble. PTSD
Mhm.
does this to the system, but
Mhm.
their system is constantly misinterpreting things that
Mhm.
are not threatening as
Mm.
threatening.
Mm.
They were in such a state of hypervigilance
Mhm.
before.
Mhm.
So I bring up this interesting idea of like what it means to have this predictive brain that works on a combination of past experience to say, is it possible when you're talking about this idea that men maybe are less able, less whatever, is it possible they have less data to work from that is
Mm.
tangible experiences of having done it before? And so they
Mm.
can't recall as easily, as adeptly how to get into those spaces until new experiences are wired in. And that's
Mm.
a question I have, right? Because I
Mhm.
think that's true for all of us. There's always things we haven't yet done.
Mhm.
And once we have done them, if we wire them in, they
Mhm.
become part of our then ongoing ability, and our capacity shifts and our
Mhm.
capacity changes and grows. But if we never have the experiences,
Mhm.
the uncomfortable experiences that
Mhm.
sometimes pull us away from all of the things we have known,
Yeah.
we really can't develop the data at a very, physiological brain level
Yeah.
to be able to recall and utilize that in future instances. So I
Yeah.
think it's really important. And it's one of the reasons that some people have experiences where someone makes such a strong impression on them that it
Mhm.
changes the way they're able to show up in the world, because I think it
Mhm.
so strongly gives them a new experience of
Mhm.
something that then they can actually recall that and
Mhm.
say, yes, that is how it felt to be seen. And that is
Mm.
safe. And that
Mm,
allows me to show up pushing my growth edge of being seen in
mm,
other situations because I know what it feels like
mm.
to be held safely.
I love that. I absolutely love that description and the science behind it and all of it. Like my nerdy mind is all over this. Like, who wrote this? I want to read it. I want to find out more. Absolutely. That is amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And that's such a beautiful perspective. And to me, that speaks even louder of the value of coaching and how important it
Mhm.
is to have someone that's impartial to the story, to the drama, to the situation. Because I think a lot of people think, I don't need a coach. I've got my friends or I've got my family or I've got like, somebody that I can talk to in my circle that's safe. But when we think about it, it's exactly what you said. Actually, those people are going to reflect what you're accustomed to. So you might tell your one girlfriend that's super dramatic, or you might tell your partner or your parent or whoever that person, that go-to person that you're accustomed to. And it's almost like it's a little bit of insanity. We expect a different outcome doing the same thing. And so what you just shared about creating that safety, and to me, I see that as a paradigm shift. It's really our mind, our body, and our spirit coming into a new existence that's possible when that safety is held and when people are able to just be that authentic expression and be radically accepted. It's that
Mhm.
level of their own personal radical acceptance where they get to decide, what does me being safe in my expression, what is the next step? What does that look like? And then we talk about boundaries and we talk about, all these things, but I think it's really difficult to establish. People start with boundaries a lot of times when it comes to coaching, and I think it's really challenging to establish a boundary based on a misconception of who you are. And so
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
when I do my coaching, I always start with, knowing thyself first and foremost, knowing thy real self, thy true self, thy authentic self. And a lot of it goes back to questioning. And it's exactly what you said. And it does go back to the emotional release. It goes back to the body and doing somatic inquiry and figuring out, well, where is the tension and what wisdom does it have for you? And how can that fully express? That way you have a different set point. So the science that you just described brings everything full circle when it comes to emotions and expression, and the value of that coaching to actually discover and create a new world for ourselves. So thank you for
Mm.
sharing that.
Yeah, and any of these concepts, whether it's boundaries, whether it's authenticity, whether it's, I think an important filter question to ask ourselves is, does my showing up fully and authentically threaten you showing up fully and authentically?
Mm,
Or try to control or minimize you showing up fully. That is, I think, an interesting space because true authenticity, true, solid, important, healthy boundaries are not about restricting other.
that's right.
They are about really honoring fullness, the
Yes.
fullness of me and the fullness of you. So
Yes.
if my authenticity creates a space where you can no longer be authentic,
Yes.
for whatever reason, then we've got it. There's something interesting to dig into there.
That's
If
right.
my boundary means you can't do something, that's a problem.
That's right.
And that's a little bit of this, weaponized therapy speak sometimes that pops up. People think they understand boundaries, authenticity, any of these concepts, and they sort of misuse or even abuse them a little bit
Yeah.
to say like, well, no, you can't do that. That's my boundary. But
Yes.
that's actually not what a boundary is.
That's right.
My boundary is I'm not going to accept it.
That's right.
Or it's not welcome in my space. But
Yeah.
it's not that I can tell you what to do or who to be or how to show up. So that
That's
is an
right.
interesting thing for me too, right? Because I think there's this sort of like, well, me being authentic means I can do whatever I want and say really hurtful things and that may be who you are authentically. But there's also another side to that
Yeah.
to say, if that's your true authentic, then you have to respect that it may not be welcome
Yeah.
in in all spaces.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really beautiful point. And that's a great point. And what you said about our interconnectedness and what authenticity truly means, the depth and the core. And I think that's the spiritually aligned version of authenticity when we are deeply connected, when we're not functioning out of that ego that's trying to prove itself, that's trying to be right. I often say this to couples. You can either move forward together, or you can be right, but you can't do both because they've
Mhm.
gotten to a point where they're butting heads and they're not in the same. I use the analogy of a roller coaster ride. You're not on the same train. You are at war with each other. Like there's no way you're going to have fun on this journey if this is how we're going to, there's no moving forward with this. And that's where you're right. I see boundaries, and I don't love the term boundaries. I think it's used a lot in coaching and sort of therapy and all of these spaces. And I really love what you said, that it actually, it's how can we be true to ourselves while holding that space for others. And that's all others, even in their storm, even in their, their explosion, their
Mhm.
sorrow, their, and even if we can take it even a step further, is completely removing our reaction, removing ourselves to be able to hold that space. I think if we're able to do that better, I think that is holding that safety for others, I think creates that safety for us as well. And it kind of like it feeds into each other, and then we can all be a little safer and a little more authentic and a little more vulnerable, because yeah, I think it's being uncomfortable is safe, which is,
Mhm.
it's an oxymoron for a lot of people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think a big piece that we sometimes forget because we're such a fast-moving culture is that we've got to wire it in. We've
Yeah.
got to sort of say, this is what it feels like to be vulnerable and be okay.
Yeah.
It's weird, it's hard. I feel like all of these things, but I'm okay.
Yeah.
And this is okay because I think we're so quick to like just breeze straight past it.
That's right.
We can lose that chance, that valuable chance to say, no, this is what it feels like. And for me, in my personal and, book exploration of change, that's really what that is this, yes, the unknown is scary. Doing things we haven't done before is scary,
Yeah.
but we have all done things we haven't done before over and over and over again. We
Yes.
just do them and then we sort of like push it aside and we get to the next one and we go, something I haven't done before. So scary. But we've done it
Yeah.
over and over and over again ad infinitum, back to when we learned how to walk or when we learned how to do any of the things that we learned how to do when we were very, very, very young,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
But we don't take the time to say, this is what it feels like to have done something I've never done before.
Yeah.
And what do I actually feel? I feel excited.
Yeah.
I feel engaged. I
Yeah.
feel energized. I feel passionate. I
Yes.
feel more fully who I am.
Yes.
That's the part of change, the part of, growth that we don't always honor
Yeah.
because I think we're so busy focusing on outcome and we're so busy focusing on how hard it might be,
That's
right?
right. That's right. Yeah, we brace. It's almost like you just hold your
Yes,
breath just to get through it, and
yes.
then you brace yourself, and then you miss the entire journey. And then you look back and think, "Oh, when I was 20, that was the time of my life. I didn't know it back then. I thought it was terrifying, but those were the best days of my life." And you're absolutely right. It's like there are so many other ways to see our world and to approach it. So I'm really curious about your book. I feel like you and I, we could talk forever. Um, but I'm so curious about
10
your
hours
book.
later.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your book and what people can look forward to?
Yeah, I would love to. So, it's called Embracing the Unknown, Exploring the Pathways to Change. And it's really an exploration of what it means to change, and really grappling with the questions more than the answers and getting comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah,
It's set up in three parts. And the first part is really why change? Like why even bother, right? Looking at the reasons it's difficult, the reasons it's hard, the barriers to changing, to really normalize that
yeah,
this is not something that you alone or me alone struggles with. This is really universal. And looking at then the tools and resources that we can bring in. The second part is really changing now. Like if you're in a mode of looking at what it means to change, how you really approach that. And it's a combination of three, what I consider kind of levers, right, that we can pull on or work with at any given time. And it's this idea of stretch, which is this moving into uncomfortable spaces,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Permission, which is a huge one. Permission to try something new, let go, permission to fall, permission to fail, permission to
yeah.
fly, right?
Mhm.
Any of those things require permission. And then this idea of perspective. And perspective is something that's talked about a lot, but I took the approach of saying, like, really what happens if perspective is a tool that allows us to zoom in and zoom out. And sometimes we find we're really zoomed in and
Yeah.
we need to sort of like, what happens if I zoom out? Okay, now I want to zoom back in. And if we sort of have this ability to sort of shift and move with our perspective while we're thinking about permission, while we're stretching ourselves, that's the sort of the concept of these levers that sort of get moved in conjunction with each other. It really becomes this beautiful cycle of change because it
Mm,
isn't A to B, it isn't any of these things,
yeah.
right? And it allows us to really explore the freedom and the importance of like looking at anything in our lives as a journey, as a
Yes.
movement pattern. And then the final part of the book, which really probably is my favorite, is this idea of how we change forever. And for me, that is establishing a set of core values that help us align with what it means to change. And the word align is broken out for me authenticity, learning, intentionality, gratitude, and nurturing as the five sort of core values of what it means to live sustainably in change. So that we can really dig into how those core values show up for our lives and how we can apply them in deeper ways to support really our becoming, our constant
Yeah.
rebirth into the new versions of ourselves that can show up in the world as exactly who we need them to be.
Wow.
So that's sort of the exploration in a much broader sense. And it was a beautiful, fascinating journey for me. Brought up all sorts of questions about authenticity, about who am I to write this book? What do I actually know? I swam very, very quickly and deeply to like, I know everything, I know nothing. You know,
Yeah.
it's sort of like this constant game of like, who am I today? Right? Authenticity 101. Who am I today when I was writing? But it's been an amazing journey because it's been such an opportunity to support people in something that we all face. Everybody has to grapple with change. And I think we've spent far too long trying to distill it down into three simple steps
Yeah.
or change for dummies, right? Which is a version of a book that probably exists out there. But it's not formulaic. We are us, each so unique and so wonderfully poised to do so many different beautiful things in the world that I think part of what change really means is honoring that. And
Mm.
we can't distill it down. And so, it's this beautiful process of growing into who we are and then consistently challenging ourselves and asking questions about who we next want to be.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. And that sounds like a really interesting book. And so what do you feel that the audience or, if someone was to pick up this book and read it, how do you feel their life would change or what would they see kind of before and after? You're talking about change and I'm assuming there are some maybe inspirations or calls to action. What could a reader really look forward to from the book?
Mhm. Thanks. That's a great question. So it's really a fascinating blend of research, and my brain works in a lot of very divergent, fast ways. So there's everything from like research about resiliency in ant colonies to experience with horses to stories of other people who have grappled with and worked through different examples of how change shows up in their lives. But I think most of all, someone would walk away understanding that it is their work to do in the best way
Mm,
possible. It's like the best gift in the world is to get to choose your life.
yeah.
And you could be someone really happy with where you are in your life, and you may not feel you need to change, and you may be absolutely correct about that. But there may be a time when you're ready to take a different step or move in a different direction. And so I view sort of any of these tools, resources, and skills as muscles. And so if you're like ready to work with a personal trainer and get in there and change yourself, like this is one way to do it. But another one is like, okay, let's just remind ourselves how good it feels to
Yeah.
strengthen some of these muscles. So I give some tips. I give a lot of, ways for people to dig into a lot of these different concepts. But mostly, I think it's a little bit of a journey on asking yourself some questions and just challenging what you may think you know about who you've been and where you still want to go.
That's amazing. That's so great, Lisa. That's so wonderful. And as you were speaking, I think about, even if you don't want to change, sooner or later you're gonna age and your hormones are gonna force you to. Like it's a constant change process. So I just love that inspiration. Even when we think that our life is perfect exactly the way it is, there's just so much more depth to it. And I
Yes.
love that.
And in some ways, it sort of creates this like, what if the way we engaged with the world just shifted a little bit, right? What if we went from assumptive thinking to more curious thinking? What
Yeah.
if we stopped seeking so many answers and started asking more questions? And what if we leaned into all of those spaces of just not knowing?
Oh,
Rather than having to, and I have friends with young kids, I have friends with, and every day is a new shifting experience where they have no idea what they are doing, right?
absolutely.
And you look at the parent, you look at the child, and the child is wide-eyed and excited and taking every single step like it is the most amazing thing in the world. And often the parents are like, I don't know what I'm doing,
That's
right?
right.
How can we sort of make that gap a little bit less and renew some of our childlike wonder and awe in the way we approach the world,
Mm.
while combining it with this amazing wisdom and experience that we've developed as we have grown and as we have gathered all of these amazing life experiences.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. That sounds really exciting. And so do you also work with clients one-on-one in group settings? You work with teams? How do you share your gift other than in this amazing book that's coming out?
Yeah, thank you. So yes, and I actually have an opportunity coming up for some group work. I launched last year what I called the Change Lab, which is a focused small group opportunity to dive in with other people and exploration of what it means to change. And again, some people come with very specific things they're working on.
Yeah.
Other people are just really curious about how to strengthen some of these muscles and dive in a little bit more. So I'm going to be running another one of my change labs coming up here in May, which is really exciting. So that's a great opportunity. And yes, I do also do some one-on-one work. I have a program that I call Guided, that is sort of a 3-month journey of navigational support for whatever people might have going on in their lives. And my website is probably the best way to just learn more about me and get in touch. And
Perfect.
if it's okay to share that, I can share it.
Please.
Otherwise, you can include it. It's just my name, lisadeangelis.com. And yeah, here I'll do a quick shameless promotion. Embracing the
Yes.
unknown here. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it's been amazing to walk with so many people on their journeys of just grappling with these next steps in life. And it's an honor, it's a privilege. And I know you I have a feeling you know this from your coaching work as well. It's really a joy to walk with people through these moments in their lives where they're really committing to being who they want to be in these next phases. And it's a special thing. I feel fortunate.
Absolutely. So beautiful. Congratulations. I honor you so much for taking the step and doing the thing because writing is not easy. Everyone always, like, so many people come to me like, oh, I'm going to write a book. I'm like, go ahead, do that. I'm like, I'm just co-authoring a book now and just a chapter, just getting that chapter because there's so many places my mind wants to go and my spirit's taking
Mhm,
me to like write 10
mhm.
books at the same time. And it's such a journey, even that in and of itself. So I just want to congratulate you. I want to honor the work that you do. And as a change specialist in healthcare, like, thank you. Can you go and start training healthcare on how to change? That change is actually the best thing we could possibly ever do. But yeah, no, it's such a beautiful journey. And even like, the names of your offers are so beautiful and so aligned. I get curious, just one thing that popped up for me was in the Change Lab, do you have like, do you group people into specific, let's say you have 30 people reach out to you. Do you actually group them based on like careers or based on different interests, or how do you separate or combine people to work together?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, it's funny, similar to the way I know you move through the world. Some of it I feel like is the right people come to the right
Yeah.
combinations at the right time. So I try not to do too much ego intervention, I guess we
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
call it. Think I know better than, than bigger forces out there. But I actually really love situations where people can engage with those that are really different from them.
Yeah.
So different ages. Sometimes I'll actually encourage some cross-generational conversations.
Beautiful.
I won't necessarily move people into groups by age, just because I think there's a lot to be learned from perspective experiences
Absolutely.
both ways. I do find sometimes the people that are really working through things very specifically versus the people just kind of working on their general strengthening change skills,
Yeah.
that tends to be maybe a better way to allow people to dig into what they're looking for a little bit more specifically. But it's always, I feel like it's a little bit of like, what are we going to get this? Who are
Yes.
we
Yeah.
working with this time? And it always gets, there's some excitement that comes along
Totally.
with
Totally. Yeah, the universe creates it. Absolutely. You just built it and they come. So
that. Yes.
amazing. Yes. Thank you so, so much. Thank you for sharing your gifts, and um, people know how to get in touch with you. If there's one last thing that you want to leave the audience with, maybe it's
Mm.
a call to action in terms of really honoring or seeing change as something exciting or expansive or juicy or just getting curious. What would be that one liner or that sort of last word for the podcast audience?
The last thing I would say is the freedom to choose is a gift. And that's
Mm.
really what change is all about. Don't forget that. Like, just
Ah,
we all have the freedom to choose.
beautiful. Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you have the power of choice, hit a like, make a comment in the chat. Let us know. What did you love about this? What did you not love about this? What can we learn? What questions do you have? And maybe we can do a second episode, Lisa. I feel like we could seriously talk forever.
Seriously, we could probably be going on for a very long time.
Awesome.
Yes, yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who took the time to listen, because that's really what I think the value of these conversations are in, is the way they resonate out in the world. And so I'm always really grateful to the people listening, like now, in a week, in a year, in 10 years, when somebody finds this recording in the middle of nowhere, right? I think that's the sort of the beauty and the power of the technology world we live in, is like we've just really planted this really cool seed that's going to be out there for those people. So thank you to all those people who will listen at any time along the line. And I hope you just grab something that's meaningful to you.
Oh, thank you. You just honored the purpose of the podcast so beautifully. Thank you. I'm like a little proud. I'm like a proud mama bird just watching it grow by itself. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Yeah,
Oh,
thank you.
thanks for being with us. Have a beautiful day.